Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of the Illinois LawCast, a podcast about the wisdom, wit, and curiosity of the University of Illinois College of Law. I'm your host, Chris Davies, and for this episode I had the pleasure of speaking with Professor Bob Lawless, a nationally recognized expert in bankruptcy law, consumer finance, and empirical legal studies. Professor Lawless is also a co-author of Debt's Grip, Risk and Consumer Bankruptcy. Published this month, Debt's Grip draws from his work on the Consumer Bankruptcy Project and combines empirical data with personal narratives from bankruptcy filers to thoroughly detail the financial struggles of American households. We talk about the book, the research that went into it, and how it all comes back to the classroom. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Bob Lawless. Professor Bob Lawless, thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to do this.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about your new book, Debt's Grip, which was really interesting. But I wanted to just start with a little bit about you and how you came to a career in law and became an expert in the world of bankruptcy.
Well, part of that's by accident, the latter part, and the former part, not so much by accident. So my father was an attorney, actually a graduate of the University of Illinois College of Law, class of 1950.
Wow.
So I grew up wanting to be a lawyer and wanting to come to the University of Illinois as a student, and it's been a real privilege. I came back here after teaching at some other schools, came back here full-time in 2006, and it's been a real privilege of my career to come back and be able to teach and work not only where I went to school, but where my father went to school.
Yeah. And this book, this is a little bit different than a law review article that you might or a textbook that you might have worked on previously. Can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to do this and what went into the work?
Great question. Why a book? Because we had been publishing a lot of law review articles, and parts of the book build on law review articles that we had published. And part of this was to get everything in one place. It was also, there's more than just what's in the law review articles. So it's not just a rehash of what's in there, but it also was to reach different audiences. So people who read law reviews tend to be lawyers, judges, academics, the like. We wanted to reach a broader audience with this. We wrote it at a level we hope that it's accessible to everyone, so we avoid a lot of technical jargon. Whether we do have to talk about technical jargon, we try to explain it in plain English and then use the jargon after that. But so far, it seems to have worked. That seemingly it's been noticed by people outside of kind of the traditional readers of law reviews and legal scholarship.
And who did you have in mind to be your target audience for this?
Obviously, mainly people in the legal field, right? Mm-hmm. I do certainly think that. I think we're legal scholars, right? So, one of my colleagues is a sociologist, but we're scholars. We expect scholars to read it, but in many ways, the audience for the book are lawyers and judges who are practicing the field, journalists, congressional staffers. We're trying to get people to think about not just bankruptcy law, but what kind of our national policies are that have shaped the finances of American households, because what we see in bankruptcy court are the effects of a lot of policies that have shifted risk onto people. Risk, some people do really well, right? And we hear often about those success stories, but the people who have had misfortune fall on them really through no fault of their own, just because a lot of the risks that from policy choices we've made, their stories are in the bankruptcy files and in our book.
Right, and you are a bankruptcy expert, and this book is about consumer bankruptcy, but it's more about American households and the risk and the debt that they take on. And you were talking about it being for more of a general audience. Why focus on that? Why is that important in today's political climate, just in America today?
Well, there's obviously a lot of stress on American households. I think a lot of the political debate right now revolves around that, right? You see people on both the right and the left saying not enough is being done for pocketbook issues for American households. So, why is it important? I think that's in many ways one of maybe the most important issues facing our nation. Obviously, we have great technological change, just as for example, right? So people there's more job turnover, right? And so what happens, you've done everything right? You went to school, you got your training, but that job or that business that you work for just is no longer viable because of technological change, right? As I like to say right there, you don't see typewriter manufacturers anymore, right? So, so what happens to you? And we need to have more conversations about policy choices to help people who just end up on the wrong side of these sorts of outcomes, right? And again, that often ends up with financial distress. Not everybody, obviously, but that often ends up with financial distress, those sorts of stories. And not everyone with financial distress files bankruptcy, but many of them do. And so their stories, and again, what that means to live in financial precarity is, the word we use. Mm-hmm. What it means to live in financial precarity ends up in the bankruptcy files, right? And one thing about our book is we use the court records, the official court records, which are public information, have all sorts of financial detail about what the income and assets and debts of the people who file bankruptcy are, but we also survey people who file bankruptcy, and we supplement those court records with the survey responses, everything from kind of like who are you to what went wrong before bankruptcy. All that sort of information is not in the public court file. And so combining the court files with this survey data, where I hope we're able to provide a very thick description of what it means to live in financial precarity on the financial edge.
Yeah. You, in the introduction to the book, you and your co-authors write that bankruptcy is a story of America. And then you use these narratives that you've gathered to help illustrate them. Were there any narratives that really stood out to you in particular that you can recall right now?
Boy, you're challenging
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, yes. You are putting me on the spot to try to remember those particular. So we have over 2,400 surveys. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot. 8,800 bankruptcy files, 2,400 people responded to our survey. Yeah, I mean, I try to think anyone in particular. I will tell you that those narratives and just for listeners, right, what we're talking about is the very end of the survey concludes with just an open-ended, if you would be comfortable, we'd just be interested in hearing your story in your own words. And so so there's a page they can handwrite, or if they fill it out online, they can type the story in. Those narratives are heartbreaking. They're the hardest part of the data collection that we do. You hear people, well, I do remember one that stands out, that the person says they're over the age of 65, which is the fastest growing group of bankruptcy filers. We see more and more people over the age of 65 filing bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. 1 in 6 bankruptcy filers are now over the age of 65. And the person relates everything kind of their life and how they kind of did everything right. I've already mentioned that, right? But, this idea that I did everything right. I worked hard. I had an education, all this. And here's what happened to me, right? I got sick and, all this stuff. And then it concludes with the statement, and now here I am, just kind of a sad-ass loser filling out a university survey about bankruptcy. I mean, that really hit me, right? Because the person was not a loser, right? They'd done everything right. They'd worked hard. They had just had misfortune befall them. Mm-hmm. And they were left there. There was no safety net to catch them. They're over the age of 65, right? There's not time to rebuild wealth, to go out and start a new career, to re-educate themselves into some other profession or some other job. The surveys, there's all sorts of university research protocols to protect the anonymity, and so you can't do this. But you want to just reach out to them and say, it's not your fault. Mm-hmm. So you ask. I guess that one does maybe really stick out in my mind, and it's in the book.
Yeah, there are so many of these in the book. Yeah. One that, if I may read from the book for a minute, just really stood out to me was a single black 27-year-old who filed Chapter 13, and he wrote, "I'm currently a nursing student at a for-profit college. I'm a black male, not a thug, not a gangster. I'm a nursing student. I lost my job. I've been without lights, gas, money. I filed bankruptcy not out of pity, but because I had no other road to go down." And I think what struck me there was how relatable it seemed, and just the emotions, which you guys captured in some of your survey data as well, that people feel when they go through this, and how, when you see a table that says people are feeling depressed, that's one thing, but to hear it in their own words, it gives another dimension to the work. And I was really impressed with that in the book and how you guys weaved that through the narrative.
Well, first, I really need to give credit to my co-authors, Pamela Foey at Georgia and Deborah Thorne at the University of Idaho, because they were the ones that really pushed for that. Not that I was resistant, but I really need to give them credit for having that part of the vision for the book, because we're all data people, the three of us, and you said it exactly right? It's one thing to publish a table, and maybe this goes back to your question about why a book, right? Because we hadn't really used those narratives in the law review articles and peer-reviewed articles where we had published this work, but they provide exactly what you're saying, right? The sort of context, so the quote you're saying, there's all sorts of tables that will show you for-profit colleges and the default rates on student loans there, and I can give you all sorts of numbers about that, right? But that personal statement, that bearing witness about what that really means at an individual level, adds something that you don't get just from the raw numbers alone.
Right. And you talked about an example of a senior, and my example was a Black man. And another group that you guys identified in your writing was women, who are disproportionately represented among bankruptcy filers. Tell me a little bit about the research and finding that, and how important this is when you're talking about American households and debt and risk and bankruptcy.
Yes. So I guess I'd like to take all three of those, right? So we have a chapter on Black filers, we have a chapter on older filers, and we have a chapter on women filers. And the chapter on women is especially women, single women with children, right? One of the themes of the book is that what comes into bankruptcy court reflects larger patterns in society, right? And all three of those demographic groups, they're in bankruptcy court because of larger trends, right? The shrinking of the safety net for older Americans, right? Pensions being replaced with 401ks and IRAs, right? The racial wealth gap and racial pay disparities are well known. We see that showing up in bankruptcy court. Predatory lending practices, which disproportionately affect Blacks and other racial minorities, show up in bankruptcy court. And then the burdens that are placed on child raising expectations that are placed on women. Women disproportionately bear responsibility for raising children after relationships fall apart. And so, right, that's a big financial strain that ends up in bankruptcy court. We start the book off with some talking more about types of debt, like you'd expect maybe lawyers to do, right? Medical debt. But the middle part of the book makes an important point that we can't ignore that this isn't happening against a backdrop of larger patterns in American society. Right.
And some interesting things, Black households represent 27% of bankruptcy, but only 14% of the U.S. population. Women are 58% of filers.
Yes.
Roughly 50% of the population. Right. Some interesting facts that you found there. You've been a part of the Consumer Bankruptcy Project since
2001.
Right. And you came on as co-PI later on.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to be part of the group that collected this data, and then, along with Pamela Fooey and Deborah Thorne, wrote this book.
So that's a kind of there's a lot of different ways to answer that. So we already kind of talked about how I got into law. I was expecting to be a lawyer. My background was in accounting, so I have a lot of facility with numbers. And I started doing empirical work almost from the very beginning of my first week at the University of Missouri, where my first teaching position was. And I worked with a business school professor and learned a lot of the statistical side of it by co-authoring. So the Consumer Bankruptcy Project was started by Elizabeth Warren and Jay Westbrook and Terry Sullivan. It was very well known in my field. And just I kind of had come to know those folks. And this out of the blue, I got a phone call and invited me on to the project. Would you be interested in working with us? And I had become very empirically focused, wanting to measure not just the law in the books, but actually what happens on the ground. And this was a tremendous opportunity in my field with well-known scholars to do exactly what I was really interested in doing. So, of course, I was going to say yes to that, right? And I learned a lot from them. We mentioned in the book that without the work of Professors Sullivan, Warren, and Westbrook, none of this would have happened. They taught us our craft.
Yeah.
Professor Fooey and Professor Thorne and I all have different relationships. I co-authored with them. They were actually students of theirs. You asked, why did I become interested? This was a tremendous opportunity much earlier in my career to not just to work on a topic that I was really interested in a way that I was really interested in doing, but to work and learn with some of the leaders in the field. And a lot of what I've been able to do is attributable to being able to work with them.
Yeah, and you've been able to take that opportunity that you got in your career and bring it to your classroom here at the University of Illinois, right?
Well, it's interesting. Yes, you say that because I learned that from them. So they did that with their students. And when I teach bankruptcy, I will use the data from the Consumer Bankruptcy Project in class. Some of it's in the textbooks. So, it's been, again, a great privilege. So a lot of the data is in the textbooks. And sometimes I can come in and give them the inside baseball story about that data from the textbook. But more so, we've involved the students in the research here. At the University of Illinois, we are principally responsible for doing the court record data for the project. So I have always had 3 students who are always working with me on that. I always like to tell the students when I'm recruiting them to do it, I say, you're going to be up to your elbows in bankruptcy court files, and it'll give you a real experience about how the courts run, the sort of information the courts use. You'll know your way around a bankruptcy file. I think it's been a good learning experience. I think it's been good for students to be able to say when they're looking for jobs that they've worked with the court records and that they've worked, not just as a research assistant looking at cases or opinions, but actually working with materials that the lawyers themselves and the judges themselves are working with in the courtroom. In fact, as I think about it, I've had more than one judge tell me that they like our students for law clerks because they know they've seen the court files and have some familiarity with they already know kind of what's happening in the bankruptcy courts.
Yeah, and their work made it into your book as well.
And that's exactly right. And their work, without them, the book wouldn't have happened because there's 8,800 cases, 2,400 surveys. There's more than any one person could humanly do. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have any examples? You mentioned that, working on this, judges like it. It's helped them in their future careers. What your students have gone on to do after helping you with your research?
So one former research assistant is now a professor herself. Mm-hmm. We have students who, so a lot of students will go on to do bankruptcy court clerkships, which of course court clerkships are a great experience great way to begin your career. A lot of folks are in associate positions. Even it scares me now that I have students who come back as, partners and running practice groups, and it scares me in the sense that it must mean I'm old. But it's we have a very proud tradition at Illinois going back to Charles Tabb, who taught me bankruptcy law. We have a very proud tradition of kind of having a strong bankruptcy group here. There are lawyers throughout the country who are there because of what Charles started here and taught me. He taught Ralph Brubaker, who's my colleague here at the college. And we've continued that tradition of trying to build a strong cadre of people who are interested in the field. And you asked me at the beginning, I didn't answer the question about why I got into bankruptcy. Nobody goes to law school, I say, thinking they're going to be a bankruptcy lawyer. How did I get interested in it? I got interested in it because I worked with some lawyers who were doing it. It's students there seems to be people, there's a lot of students going to say, I never think it's really interesting, but it actually is really interesting. If you're working with people, it's the story of their lives. If you're working with companies, it's the story of the company. One day you're working with, an airline, and the next day you're dealing with a box manufacturer or whatever, right? You have all sorts of businesses, all sorts of areas of law intersect with bankruptcy law. It's one of the few generalist practices that you have to still know a little bit about everything, I think, that are left. So we get a lot of students who are interested in the field, not because they came in thinking that, because they take the classes, and there's also certain logic and structure to the law, and I think that is interesting. I also like to say it's kind of an insolvable problem, and that there's not enough to go around. That's the very nature of it, right? You can't. Not everybody's going to leave with their owed, and so there's that kind of problem solving aspect of it as well. Yeah.
It's interesting, you mentioned no one comes here thinking about bankruptcy, and I don't know that this is a book that maybe would have popped up on my Goodreads recommendations, but reading it was very interesting to me, and getting to your conclusions in the book really I found a lot of things that just seemed very sensible. And I was wondering what if you could whittle it down to one or two things that in your conclusions that you found and you and your co-authors wrote about, what would you say is most important?
Well, let me put it into two general buckets. So the first big bucket is we have to think about the amount of risk we've put on individuals. Mm-hmm. And that goes across a whole bunch of social welfare programs, social safety net programs. So that's the first thing I think we have to think about. And then the second bucket is, okay, so there's an old saying, every bankruptcy lawyer knows this, is capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell, right? You're going to have people in a market system who aren't going to accumulate wealth, that they're going to fall by the wayside. So we're going to have a bankruptcy system. And then, so the second bucket is ways to make that system work better. Mm-hmm. There is, I think, simple things. I think most everyone agrees we got to make it easier for people to access lawyers, make it easier for people to pay their lawyers during bankruptcy. We need to kind of fix the inequalities in the system. We talked about black filers. Black filers are in Chapter 13, and without getting too much into the details, there's no reason why race should end up being the determining factor on people ending up in a chapter that's more expensive and generally just doesn't work as often as well. So, we need to fix that. There was a congressional bill that would have eliminated 7 and 13 and just combined and had into a more simplified bankruptcy procedure. That's a kind of big bankruptcy reform, but I think that would be one that would make a lot of sense.
Excellent. Is there anything else about the book, about your teaching here that you'd want to make sure to mention?
Not necessarily. I appreciate you asking to do this. You're too kind about the book. The data themselves go back 11 years. We've been doing this, so the book is based on 11 years worth of data, and it took several years to write the book. And so I hope people find it interesting and useful. And I guess if you're listening to this and you're a potential student, come here and learn about bankruptcy law.
I did indeed find it interesting, and I hope people find it, and especially the people who can make a difference and make some of the changes that you've mentioned in here, because it does seem like very worthwhile endeavor.
We talked a little bit before we started, right? This is at one level about bankruptcy law, but the other level it's about American households, right? It's about making the system work better for American households generally, not just in the bankruptcy courts.
Well, Professor Lawless, thank you for your work here at the College of Law. Thank you for the book, and thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. Again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you again to Bob Lawless for taking time from his busy schedule to do the podcast. Debt Script is now available via the University of California Press. If you would like more information about the book, please see the link in our show notes. Thank you to our listeners for making the Illinois LawCast a part of your day. If you have any comments or suggestions for the podcast, please email them to podcast@law.illinois.edu and subscribe to the Illinois LawCast on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. This episode was recorded, mixed, and edited by me, Chris Davies. Special thanks to Kelly Moss for our album art and other graphics, and Krista Getke for her help in the editing process. Until next time, thanks again for listening to the Illinois LawCast.